All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Shvat, Mrs. Selma Woolf, with immense gratitude for the refuos from Hashem and the merit of a refuah for all of those in need, in the zchus of our brave soldiers, and the merit of Hashem, in the zchus of the return of each of our hostages. And our week of learning sponsors, Derek and Lauren Fine, in memory of Derek's mother, Rachayl Bas Shmuel, and of course we dedicate the entire Maseches Bava Ilui Nishmas, Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush Hashem Yikom Damo. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama will have an aliya, and the families in Neshama. We daven every day that the merit Hashem, our soldiers will be successful, our hostages will come home, and the merit Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give shalom to Am Yisroel. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Excuse me. Sorry. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Daf Tzadik Zayin. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem at the Mishnah on 96b on Tzadik Vav on the base. So we have a lot of beautiful and holy ground to cover today. So the Mishnah says as follows. We'll say still along the same topic that we've been discussing over the last couple of days about differences in valuation when it comes to theft. So it says the Mishnah, Gazel behema v'hiskina. Let's say you stole an animal, right? Reuven stole an animal from Shimon, and after Reuven stole it, the animal aged, right? Or avadim v'hiskinu, or a person steals a slave, and ultimately, again, the Eved gets old. So what's halacha? Mishlam is kishas hagzela. So ultimately, again, Tanakama, reflecting the view we saw in the last Mishnah, that the value of the item stolen is locked in at the time of theft. That's what we look at, and that's the amount, that's the value for which the thief is chayiv. Meir says, va'avadim, omer lo harisha chalafanecha. Meir says, no. Meir says, yes. While I agree ultimately, again, with that principle, that normally, again, the value of the item stolen is locked in at the time that it was stolen. However, when it comes to avodah, when it comes to slaves, ultimately, again, the thief has the ability just to return the slave to its owner and say, here it is, this is what I stole, this is what I'm giving you back, and that's the end of the discussion. Why is an Eved different? Rabbi Meir holds that an Eved is like karka, an Eved is like real property, and karka ain't an exelis. Ultimately, again, land cannot be stolen. Land cannot be stolen. Therefore, the Eved was never, quote-unquote, fully, right? It never left the domain, ultimately, of the owner. And therefore, again, the thief has the ability to say, look, I stole the Eved. Here's the Eved. The Eved was worth $5,000 at the time that you stole him, and now he's worth $4,500. Doesn't make a difference. Halacha l'maaseh, here's your Eved back. That's the end of the discussion. Fine. Gazel matbeh v'nistak. Let's say, again, Reuven stole a coin from Shimon, and it cracked, right? Peros v'erkivu, or he stole fruit, and the fruit rotted. So yain v'hechmitz, or he stole oil. Ultimately, again, and the oil turned to vinegar. Mishayim kishas hagzela. So we'll say, again, all the same principle. You pay in accordance with the value of the item at the time that it was stolen. Madbea v'nifsal. So we'll say, now watch this. What happens if he stole a coin? Reuven stole a coin from Shimon, and now the coin became puzzle. Then we'll say, how does a coin become puzzle? So Rashi points out over here that halacha l'maisa is taken out of circulation. Right? That means nifsal. It's no longer really a usable form of currency, taken out of circulation. Or truma v'nitnes. Or Reuven stole truma from Shimon, and the truma became tameh. Chametz v'avar lava Pesach. Or he stole chametz. Ultimately, again, and then Pesach came. And remember, what's the halacha again with chametz shavar avar lava Pesach? It is aser ba'ana. Or behima v'nis avda ba'avera. Or ultimately, again, Reuven stole an animal from Shimon, but then the animal was used in an act of bestiality. Or ultimately, again, the animal itself became invalid for carbonic use. Rashi's example is the animal developed a cataract, right? Or ultimately, again, the animal was going to be stoned, right? All these cases, we'll get into this in Gemara, but these are all examples of hezek she'eno nicker. In other words, there's been damage done to the animal, but it's unrecognizable damage. Right? You can't tell. The animal doesn't look differently. The animal doesn't present differently. So in all of those cases, the Tanakama says, Omer lo, haresh l'chalafanecha. I shouldn't say animal. It's any case. In other words, these are all examples of Reuven stole from Shimon. The stolen item underwent a fundamental change, but the change is unrecognizable. Now, to be clear, ultimately, again, the change itself clearly devalues the animal, right? Or I keep saying animal. The change itself clearly devalues the item that was stolen. But halacha l'maisa is hezek she'eino nikar, unrecognizable damage, and therefore the Tanakama paskins that you could just give back the stolen object as is. All right, good. We'll see in the Gemara ultimately again how to go ahead and deal with these cases. Fine. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amra Papa says lo hiskina mamish. So remember again the example that the Mishnah gave was Reuven stole an animal from Shimon and the animal got old. So what's the halacha? The halacha is Reuven is obligated to pay kishas hagzela. He's obligated to pay in accordance with the time that the object was stolen. So the Gemara says, lo hiskina mamish. So when we say the animal aged, it doesn't literally have to mean an aged. Ella afilu kachsha. Rather, it means even if the animal was weakened. The idea is that when Reuven stole the animal was worth X, and now ultimately again the animal aged, got older, and therefore it's worth X minus Y. So what's the halacha? Reuven pays kishas hagzela. You're on the hook for the value of the animal at the time that you stole it. But that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah doesn't say the animal became weak. The Mishnah says the animal got old. So the Gemara says, Kachsha kegon hiskina. It means that it became weak, like getting old. What does that mean? Delo hadir bari. Both say, just like when something gets old, it does not become young again. So too, if the animal is weakened, ultimately, again, it means it gets weakened in an irreversible way. Good. Amrle Mark Shisha Reid Rav Chisler Vashi Hachi Kamri Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan Afilu Ganav Talabana Se'ayo. So Rabbi said, this is we learned this yesterday. So comes along Mark Shisha, the son of Rav Chisda, and he said to Rav Ashi, this is what was said over in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. If a person stole a sheep and it matured, or Egel Vanasa Shor, or he stole a calf and ultimately became an ox. So we'll say the principle that we have, remember there's a number of different things happening over here. So the idea that our Mishnah is talking about is really the idea espoused in the previous Mishnah, that when you steal an item, the value of the stolen item is really locked in at the time of the theft. There's another halacha. What's the other halacha? If Reuven steals an object from Shimon, and that object undergoes a fundamental change. We've spoken extensively about what does change mean, right? We saw on the end of yesterday's daf, change means irreversible change. Change means change in name. So what happens? It undergoes change. What's the halacha? The thief acquires the item. The thief acquires the item. Now remember again, when we say the thief acquires the item, what does that mean? He doesn't have to repay the item. What does he repay? He repays value. So let's say, for example, Reuven steals a calf from Shimon, and it becomes an ox. So then, what's the halacha? Reuven, the thief, acquires the object. He has to make restitution the value of the amount. Now, we'll say, why does this matter for us? Remember, therefore, in this case, tavachu machar. So remember, we just said this yesterday. Reuven steals a calf from Shimon. Afterwards, the calf becomes an ox. Then Reuven slaughters and sells it. So normally, slaughtering and selling a stolen item makes you liable to what? Arba v'chamisha. In this case, it doesn't. Why? Shalahu tovech, shalahu mocher. Ultimately, again, in this case, it's not chayiv arba v'chamisha. Why not? Because he stole the calf. When the calf became an ox, the object became his. The animal became his. Therefore, when he subsequently slaughters and steals, slaughters and sells, whose animal is he slaughtering and selling? His own. And therefore there's no din of arba v'chamisha. Rather, he's only obligated to pay back to Shimon the value of the calf at the time it was stolen. Amrlei says, your son back to him, Lav amina lecha, lo tachlif gavri. Have I not told you 1,000,000 times? Do not switch around attribution. Hahu mishmei di Rabbi Eloi itmar. You're right, the statement is correct. The attribution is wrong. Rather, again, ultimately, this attribution, the statement was made by Rabbi Eloi. Okay. Raimer Omer, Ba'avadim Omer Harisha Chalafanecha. So also remember again, the Mishnah begins with a rule. What's the rule? When you steal an object and the object undergoes a change in value, the halacha is you, the thief, are liable for the value of the object at the time it was stolen. Rabbi Meir then came along and said there's an exception to this rule. Exception to the rule is avadim, servants. If slaves, if you steal a slave, what's the halacha? You just, assuming the slave is still alive, you just return it as is. Return it as is. Here it is. What's Rabbi Meir's logic? Rabbi Meir's logic is that an eved is like karka. We have a general principle of karka in an exeles. You can't steal real property. Therefore, the eved never left the domain of the original owner, and therefore the thief just returns the eved as is. That's Rabbi Meir. So here we go. It says, Amrav halak Rabbi Meir. The halacha is like Rabbi Meir. Suppose say the Rav comes along and says, the halacha is Rabbi Meir that by avadim, the thief just gives back the eved. The eved was worth, $10,000 when you stole it, and now it's only worth $9,000. Karka in an exeles, here it is, done. So the Gemara said, V'rav shavik rabbanan v'avik Rabbi Meir. Here's what's interesting. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Meir is a singular opinion, which means the fact that the Mishnah quotes Rabbi Meir indicates to us what? That the Rabbanan, right, the Tanakama, do not hold this way. Tanakama would say that an eved is subject to the same law as every other stolen object, i.e., valuation at the time of the theft. So why would Rav go ahead and abandon the majority opinion of the Rabbanon and side with the singular opinion of Rabbi Meir? Amr mishum de braise ipchatanya. Ultimately, again, because the braisa ultimately has the attribution just the opposite, right? In the braisa's model, ultimately, again, it's the Rabbanon ultimately who say that an eved is like karka, and Rabbi Meir holds that it's not. So therefore, again, when Rav says Rav is in fact going with the position of the Rabbanon, I don't understand. V'Rav shavik masis of avik kibraisa. So why would Rav choose the version of the braisa over the version of the Mishnah? Rav masnisin nami ipchatani. No. In Rav's version, the Mishnah is also switched around, the positions of Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanon. So Gemara says, Umay taimid Rav da'apik masnisin mikamei braisa. Why is it that Rav chooses to switch around our Mishnah based on a braisa? Adarabba, neipok lebraisa mikamei masnisin. Switch around the attribution in the braisa in order to line it up with the Mishnah. Amri Rav nami masnisin ipcha asnei. Rav also teaches the Mishnah ultimately in the reversed order. V'bay sema kilo apich chada mikamei chada mikamei charti apich. So we'll say ultimately again there's another Mishnah, right? There's another Mishnah. So Rav really has a Mishnah and a Braisa in which the attribution is switched. And therefore, again, he chooses to switch the attribution in our Mishnah in deference to the other Braisa and other Mishnah that he has. Okay. The Sanya, as we learned, here we go. We'll say a very interesting case here. Hamachlif para b'chamar. So we'll say if someone does chalipin, which we will spend extensive time on in Bava Metzia, right? If one does a kinyan chalipin, which is a flip act of acquisition, so one exchanges a para for a chamar, right? A cow for a donkey. So what's the halacha? The yolda. Here's an interesting case. So we're not gonna wade into the technicalities over here, but generally the way chalipin works is like this. Imagine for a moment, Ruvain has a cow, Shimon has a donkey. They want to acquire each other's animal. What kinyan chalipin essentially does is, as soon as one of the parties acquires his object that he intends on acquiring, the other party acquires his object as well, even if his object is not present. It's not present, right? That's how chalipin works. So, right? So Reuven has the cow, Shimon has the donkey. As soon as Reuven takes possession of the donkey, ultimately, again, Shimon acquires the cow, wherever the cow may be. So that's how chalipin works. So that's the case over here. Now, what's happening? Now, v'yolda. Now, watch this. Now, in this case over here, so Shimon and Reuven, they're doing this chalipin, the cow for the donkey. The cow gives birth. Right? So Reuven's the owner of the cow, Shimon's the owner of the donkey. Right? Reuven wants to acquire the donkey, Shimon wants to acquire the cow. Beautiful. Now what happens? The cow gives birth. Everybody saying, here's where it gets interesting. Who thought cow birth couldn't be interesting? Or for that matter, again, one is selling his maidservant, and the maidservant gives birth. So we'll say, where does it get interesting? So we'll say, now watch this. We're going to get now into the following case. So we'll say, let's say Reuven owns the cow, Shimon owns the donkey. So now what happens? They do a kinyan chalipin. What's interesting now is, in the course of this entire process, the cow gives birth. Now, we'll say, the shaila is, in whose domain did the cow give birth? So now, the Mishnah goes through, actually the Brisa goes through a number of different scenarios. In scenario 1, Ze Omer Birshusi Yalda V'ala Shosek. So in scenario 1, Reuven says, the cow was still mine when it gave birth, and Shimon says nothing. Okay, so we'll say, what's the halacha? Zachaba. So we'll say, so this is a bari v'shema, bari adif, the one who makes the definitive claim, right? Obviously, again, it takes precedence over the one who's just quiet. Fine. Ze omer eni odeh v'ze omer eni odeh. What happens if both Reuven and Shimon say, you know what, we don't know. We're not sure exactly whose domain the animal was in when it gave birth. So what's the halacha? Yachloku. Ultimately, again, they split it. Right? They split the value. Ze omer b'shusi v'ze omer b'shusi. Oh. Well, we'll say, what happens if Reuven says, the cow gave birth in my rishus. Shimon says, the cow gave birth in my rishus. Then what's the halacha? Yishava hamocher sheber shuso yalda. Ultimately, the seller. And we'll say, in this case, the seller is the original owner of the cow. He takes a shvuah that ultimately, again, the cow gave birth while in his rishus. Why? Lefi shekol hanishba'in shebatorah nishba'in velo mishalmin. Because we'll say, ultimately, again, in general, the halacha is in order that if you swear in order to exempt yourself from payment. So that's what's really happening over here. So therefore, Reuven the seller, ultimately again takes a shvuah that he does not owe Shimon this offspring. He takes the shvuah and ultimately again he keeps it. Rabbi Meir. This is the words of Rabbi Meir. The Chacham say, "Ein nishba'in al ha'avadim v'lo al karkos." So we'll say the Chachamim say ultimately that's what? That no, we never take an oath over slaves and over real property. There's never a shvuah. We'll say that's a general halacha that there's no shvuah over slaves and karkos. Now both say again, what's the whole point of bringing this down? Because what do you see from here in this version of the Brisa? What do you see? That it's the Chachamim, the Rabbanon, who hold that avadim are like karka, not Rabbi Meir. Not Rabbi Meir, and therefore halacha l'maisa, when Rav switched the attribution, it's because he has two brises, right? Two brises that clearly indicate this changed attribution. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. Hi halacha Rabbi Meir, halacha k'Rabbanan mi'boilei. So the Gemara says, that's the case. Why does it say the halacha is like Rabbi Meir? Rav should have said the halacha is like the Rabbanon. To which the Gemara says, so we'll say, so essentially, now, this is just bringing full circle. Remember, let's take a step back. So Rav said that the halacha follows Rabbi Meir. Halacha follows Rabbi Meir. Now, we'll say, when he said halacha follows Rabbi Meir, he was really saying that what? Halacha follows the Rabbanon, because in Rav's view, the Rabbanon were the ones who said that an Eved is like karka. Therefore, looping it back to our Mishnah, Rav was saying that what? If you steal an Eved, what's the halacha? You just give him back as is. He depreciated. It doesn't matter. We just give it. Here it is. Why? Because ultimately, again, an Eved is like karka, and karka cannot be stolen. Karka cannot be stolen. Just in Rav's model, Rav feels the attribution of the Mishnah is wrong, and therefore it's not Rabbi Meir who holds that way. Rather, who is it? It's the Rabbanon. Says the Gemara, so if that's the case, Rav, why do you say that the halacha? Why do you say ultimately again that the halacha follows Rabbi Meir? Why not go with the correct attribution and say that the halacha follows the Rabbanon? To which the Gemara says, you're right. The Gemara's halachah, this is what he means to say, L'mai da'avchisru v'tanusu alach Rabbi Meir. So what Rav was saying was, according to you guys who have switched attribution, the halacha is like Rabbi Meir. Right? Really, again, according to me, the halacha is like the Rabbanon, because I feel that's the Rabbanon shita, but according to you who has the flipped attribution, the halacha is like Rabbi Meir. Okay, beautiful, I will say. So therefore, bottom line, what's the takeaway? It's pretty simple. All Rav is saying, is that at least the attribution in our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, that's like Rabbi Meir, or Rav is really saying it's really the sheet of the Rabbanon, that ultimately Eved is like karka. Karka cannot be stolen. Therefore, if you do steal an Eved, what's your obligation? Give it back. What about depreciation? It doesn't really matter. Why? Because an Eved never really leaves the domain of its master, because an Eved cannot be stolen. Therefore, as the thief, my sole obligation is give back the stolen object as is. Top of Tzadik Zayin. Umi Amar, Rav Avd Kaidami. So we'll say, does Rav really hold that an Eved is like karka? Is that really true? We'll say, watch this. It's very interesting. V'amar of Daniel barav katina amrav. Hatokif ba'avdo shel chavera va'asa b'malacha pater. So Rabbi said, this is very interesting. So Rav Daniel bar Katina said in the name of Rav, if you take your friend's Eved and you do work with him, pater, ultimately again, you do not have to pay back the owner of the Eved any money. So let's just listen to this case. Fascinating, right? So Ruvain goes over to Shimon, and Ruvain takes Shimon's Eved. Ruvain brings Shimon's Eved to his house and says, you know what? I don't know, shovel my driveway, right? Mow my lawn. Okay, and the Eved does it. So then, and then what happens? And then Ruvain returns the Eved to Shimon. Ruvain is not obligated to compensate Shimon for the use of the Eved. Okay, so the Gemara says, now watch this. So the Gemara says, "Isa daitcha avdik mikakai dami amai pater b'shusei dimarikai." Now we'll say, now that doesn't make any sense. Now, if you hold that an Eved is like karka, so therefore we'll say, therefore what? Therefore halacha l'maisa, that means that Eved remained the property of Shimon the entire time, because karka ain't an exelis. So Ruvain utilized an asset of Shimon's. Why would Ruvain not be obligated to compensate Shimon? So we'll say, this is really interesting. So the Gemara says, hachamai askinon, what's the case over here? Shelo b'shas malacha. So we'll say, when did Ruvain take Shimon's Eved? At a time that the Eved wouldn't normally be working. Whatever, he works 9 to 5. C came by at 5:30, picked him up, right, put him in his car, brought him to his house, did 2 hours of work with him, and then returned him back. So therefore, again, the Gemara is suggesting Shimon didn't really lose out. Right, Shimon didn't really lose out because Ruvain took him during non-work hours. Look at Rashi, Shelo b'shas malacha, first line, B'shah she'ino ragya lasos malacha, o she'in achshav l'baylav malacha, lasos tezenene, v'ze'in chaser pater. Interesting. So this is the case of Zan and of Zanachas. So right, Ruvain's benefiting, Shimon's not losing, because at the end of the day, either it wasn't work hours, or Lemaise again, Shimon didn't have any work for him. Therefore, again, Ruvain benefited, Shimon didn't lose out, and therefore Ruvain is not obligated to go ahead and compensate him. Kihar, let's listen to this. Kihar the Shalach le Rabbi Abba Lamari Barmar. Boy minei Rav Huna. Supposed to ask the following Shalach Rav Huna. What was the Shaila? Hadar bechatzer chaver shalom idaito. Jose, watch this. If you live in your friend's property without his knowledge, tzarech lalos lo schar o in tzarech lalos. So we had this case, right? Do you have to pay rent or not? Right? Ruvain goes into Shimon's property. Shimon has a home that he doesn't use. Ruvain lives there. Obviously, we're talking about without Shimon's knowledge, right? So is Ruvain, now what happens? 2 months later, Shimon discovers that Ruvain's living there. Is Ruvain obligated to pay Shimon rent or not? The Sholchole and Rav Huna responded, that Ruvain does not have to pay rent, right? Why not? So I'll say, so again, why? Because the Gemara frames that. Now we remember that case is a bit more complicated, right? In other words, is it a rental property, not a rental property? But Lamais, again, just in principle, the Gemara says, Ruvain doesn't have to pay rent. Why not? Zenene v'ze'ino chaser. Ruvain's benefiting, and Shimon's not losing. Sure, obviously we must be talking about a case where Ruvain's not throwing wild parties, right, and punching holes in walls, right? So Lamais, again, there's no loss to Shimon. There's a benefit to Ruvain. So in the case of Zenene, you're not obligated to pay. The Gemara is supposed to say, so therefore, the Gemara wants to suggest, it's the same thing with an Eved. So if Ruvain goes and takes Shimon's Eved at a time that the Eved is not working for Shimon, and uses the Eved in his own field, that's also Zenene v'ze'ino chaser. Ruvain's benefiting, Shimon's not losing, and therefore Ruvain is not obligated to go ahead and compensate Shimon. So the Gemara says, it's not really a fair comparison. Haki ashta, bishlama hasam bein leman damar beisa misva yosiv nechale, bein leman damar v'shaya yukas shar nechale. Let's remember we had this, that again, let's say, house is different. Why? Everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, it is better not to have a vacant home. Now, for one of two reasons. Either beisa mesiv yosiv necha, right? Either it's good to have an inhabited home. We'll say why. If no one's in the home and something goes wrong in the house, no one is there to see it, and often the damage could be amplified. Masha'inkin, if someone's there and they see, you know what, the pipes are frozen, or there's a crack in the window or something. So therefore, again, someone's living there. There's the ability to address any kind of damages. Or on a more esoteric level, v'shaya yukashar. We'll say there is a shade, right? There is a demon by the name of Shaya. And Shaya, apparently, again, this shade does damage in vacant areas. As long as there's someone living there, the shadim don't encroach. Don't encroach. Either way, so the idea is by a home, there is a positive benefit to having someone there. Someone there, however, the Gemara says, Elahacha mi nechale de nachosh avde. But I will say, but 1 second, but in the case of an Eved, I don't understand who says that the owner of an Eved thinks there's a benefit. In other words, we'll say at the end of the day, so it's true. So let's say it's 6 o'clock at night, so the Eved's not working. We'll say, what benefit is there to Shimon for Ruvain to come and go ahead and take his Eved and do work with him? In other words, we'll say one could identify a benefit in having someone live in your house that you're not using. Better not to have a vacant home. But what benefit is there in someone taking my Eved and using it without my consent? So let's say this is incredible. Amri hachinami nechale de lo listri avde. We'll say, no, there is a benefit. What's the benefit? We'll say, ultimately, again, it is not good for avodim to have free time. Right? Rashi says, or de lo listri shelo yilmad darchei habatala. He should not learn the derech of batala. We'll say, this phrase is so profound. We'll say, there's a derech to batala, right? There's an art form. There's an art form of batala, right? What's the art form of batala? So we'll say the incredible part about batala is the way it works. The way it works is it starts off small, right? It starts off ultimately again by having unstructured time, and then suddenly you have unstructured time. Then hours go by with nothing meaningful occurring, and then a person is now on the derech of batala. So what happens once you're on the derech of batala? Yisibos say there's a difference between sometimes a person is just like an episodic batlan, right? I'm a recreational batlan, right? I waste time, but it's not necessarily ingrained. Derech batala means like this is my derech. Some people do have a derech in life of batala, right? This is my derech of batala. That's terrible. That's terribly disruptive. So we'll say, so watch this. So therefore, again, the Gemara posits that as long as Shimon is not using his Eved, he doesn't mind that Reuben comes along and takes him and uses him without his permission, right? Why? Because this way, the Eved doesn't have downtime. This way, the Eved doesn't have unstructured time. I would say the worst thing for an Eved is to have unstructured time. I will say it's not just true by an Eved Kanani, it's true by an Eved Hashem as well. We learned this, the Piaget was speaking about this in a Hasidus Chabura. The worst thing in life is unstructured time. The Rebbe said this was the end of B'nai Machshava Tova, or in the beginning of Tzav Zerus. The Rebbe said that people think that when we say don't have unstructured time, means they have to be learning all the time. The Rebbe says that's not true. It's not true. In other words, the idea is just to have structure in life. So you want to hang out with your friends? Good. How long? Right? What's the time frame that's happening? You wanna watch the game? Okay, but how long? How long? And please don't say the whole thing. Right? How long? How long is that going to happen for? Right? Person's gonna learn. How long? A person's gonna sit and eat dinner. How long? Do whatever you want. Not do whatever you want, but right. You could make time for whatever you want. It doesn't all have to be learning Torah, right? But lemaisa, structure. Because when there is not structure in life, that becomes the very undoing of the individual. Well, it's incredible. So therefore, whether it's an Eved Kanani or an Eved Hashem, at the end of the day, the best thing one could have is a sense of structure. So the Gemara goes weiter. So Beit Rav Yosef, I'll just point out something very interesting over here, that how fascinating is it that we have this concept, right? I think many of us find this concept like a little bit offensive, that you could go to someone's property, right? And I can say to him, listen, I'm not hurting you by using your property without your knowledge or consent, right? In other words, don't worry, you're not losing. Get off my stuff, right? Get off my stuff. you can't walk into my house without my, but you're not there. I'm keeping the shadim out. I'm looking around. I'll make a whole list for you what needs to be done around the house, right? Or this notion that you could take someone's evet, get your hands off my stuff. So Rabbi saying it comes from a certain flawed concept of property ownership in Yiddishkeit. See, Rabbi saying, in Yiddishkeit, I don't really own anything. This is not like a socialism plug, right? Right? I'm not a Democrat, right? So the idea over here is this is not like what it means is in Yiddishkeit, in Yiddishkeit, the idea ultimately is I am a custodian for everything I own. I'm a custodian. I don't own it. The Ribono Shel Olam owns everything. Kadosh Baruch Hu gives me stuff to utilize. But I will say, if my stuff can be utilized in a way that benefits another Yid and doesn't hurt me, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm good with that. So I will say, Shmuel Silber, I'm actually not good with that. But Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I am good with that. And it's my stuff, and it's not yours. That's how the halacha views this. So therefore, in a case of zenene, v'ze'eno chaser, in a real case, we'll say obviously there are many more parameters than what we're discussing. But in a real case, where ultimately, again, Reuven could come to Shimon and say, Shimon, listen, I'm going to use your stuff, and I promise it's not going to hurt you at all. You're not going to be diminished at all. Again, within parameters, the halacha says, okay. Why? Because it doesn't really belong to Shimon. It belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rebbe Shalom has the right to set the parameters for property usage in this world. It's such an incredible yisod about how we relate, ultimately, again, to our Gashmiya. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Be'erav Yosef Bar Chama, Havatakif Avidi Inshi, Damasik Buzuzi. Supposed to listen to this. So in the house of Rav Yosef Bar Chama, when they would lend someone money, often what they would do is, if the person wasn't able or didn't repay the debt, they would seize avadim and use the avadim to pay off the debt. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rabba Berei. So Rabba, the son of Yosef, said to him, "My time avid marhachi. Why are you doing this?" Amalei Amar Rav Nachman Avda Noam Krisi Lo Shavi. Because Rav Nachman said, an eved is not even worth the food that he eats. In other words, I will say that halacha l'maisa, most avadim are not productive. And most avadim are loss leaders. In other words, they don't even really work for the amount that you end up feeding them. Therefore, again, Rav Yosef says, essentially, I'm kind of doing the master a tova, because at least when the eved is with me, I feed him. So at least, again, I'm mitigating the loss of the master. Amar le'emad amar Rav Nachman kegon daru avdei the merakid beikuvi. So Rabbi says, so maybe Rav Nachman said that when it comes to a servant like his own, like daru. So daru apparently did not like working. What did daru like doing? Daru liked drinking, right? It's a little bit of a problem if you have an eved, right? He liked drinking. So what would he do? He would dance in like the local taverns, and people would pay him in drinks. So I will say, one could imagine that such an eved like that is not highly productive in the household. So but in general, a stam eved, a stam kulu avdi, ma'avid avdi. So I'll say a regular eved certainly goes ahead and works. Amarle Anara Karav Daniel severely, the Amarav Daniel Barav Katina, Amarav. So we'll say, so therefore Rav Yosef said, I hold like Rav Daniel Barav Katina. What did he say? He said the name of Rav Hatoke Ba'avlo Shachaver of Asal Malacha Pater, who said that in general, if you take the eved of your friend, when he's not working for his friend, and you utilize him, halacha l'maisa, it's fine. It's fine, you're part from Alma, Nechalei D'lo Listri Avdei. Why? Because the master of the eved is happy. As long as my eved is there, right, is not being distracted from doing work for me. If someone else takes him and uses him, it's okay, because free time is not good for the eved. So Amarle, so the son said back to his father, Amarle Hani Mili Delo Masek Bezuzi. Mar Kaven the Masek Bezuzi Mechse Keribis. That's fine in a general case. The problem is you're taking the eved ultimately of people you lent money to. And what's the problem? Now you're taking the eved, utilizing the eved. What does it look like? Looks like interest. It looks like now you're taking an additional benefit in addition to getting repaid for the money that you lent them. You're also using their eved. It looks like interest. So listen to this. In general, we said that even though normally, if you go ahead and you live in the home of your friend that he's not using, you don't have to pay him rent. Why not? Because that's what we said before. Nevertheless, Right? So we'll say, but nevertheless, watch this. If you lend someone money, so in general, again, if Reuven goes to live in Shimon's home and Shimon doesn't live in the house, so ultimately, again, Reuven doesn't have to pay him rent. However, if Reuven lent Shimon money, and now Reuven goes to go ahead and live in the house of Shimon rent-free, Reuven does have to pay rent. Why? We'll say why? That looks like ribis. That looks like interest. Ultimately, Amalei Hadribi. So the father of Yosef said, you know what? You're right. He said to his son, you're right. I retract my position. I'm not going to do this anymore because I recognize that although technically it's permitted, it has the appearance of ribis, of interest, and therefore I'm going to stop. Incredible. So we'll say, Itmar, we'll say, let's say you take your friend's boat. And ultimately, again, you do malacha with it. So we'll say, so v'pashtos, now we're back to a case of theft. You took your friend's boat, and ultimately, again, you did work with it. So Amarav, Ratza Schara Notel, Ratza Pechsa Notel. So Rav says you can either pay back one of two amounts. Either the rental amount, right? In other words, the amount that the boat would have been rented out for, or depreciation. Shmuel says, Shmuel says, what are you talking about? You pay depreciation. That's what you pay, right? You give back the boat. And we'll say, again, what does it mean to pay for appreciation? So Shmuel is echoing our Mishnah. What's halacha when you steal something? What's halacha? What do you have to pay? The value at the time it was stolen. So what that means is, if you're giving back the object, you pay the object plus depreciation. So the Gemara says, Amar Papa, lo pligi, they're not really arguing. Hada avidala agra, hadala avidala agra. We'll say it could be that they're not arguing about two different cases. One is talking about a case ultimately again where let's say again Reuven took this boat from Shimon. So one opinion is saying that it's where Shimon went ahead and rents out the boat. So if Shimon rents out the boat, look at Rashi, avid la agra. Rashi says, Mistama ki nachis la adaita da agra nachis Hilchach lab b'taras gazlan daininan le v'nasan schara al karcho imrab hein al demei pechsa. So it says interesting. So if Shimon normally rents out the boat and Reuven takes it, we kind of look at Reuven not as a thief, but as a renter who did not ask permission. Okay, that's an interesting way to frame it, right? He's a renter who didn't ask permission, and therefore again halacha l'maisa he pays the higher of the two amounts, either the rental amount or depreciation, whereas Shmuel is talking about a case where Shimon does not normally rent out the boat, in which case Reuven is a thief, so Reuven returns the boat, plus depreciation. We'll say first white line, the other possibility is agra. Both cases are talking about a situation where Shimon rents out the boat, and it can be talking about a situation where halacha l'maisa, one case is where Reuven really had in mind to rent the boat, he just glossed over one simple detail, which is asking to rent it, right? Asking to rent it, but his intent really was to act as a renter. Second case is where he never had intention to act as a renter. Rather, again, he was a thief. Okay, beautiful. We'll say, again, all illustrations of our same principle, that when you steal an object, ultimately, again, the value of the object is locked in at the time of the theft. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. Gazel matbeh v'nistak. If you stole a coin and it cracked. So Rav Huna says nistak. So remember again, the halacha in the Mishnah was, if you steal a coin and it cracked, what's the halacha? You have to pay back the value of the coin at the time that you stole it. That's the halacha. So therefore, again, the Gemara says as follows. So Amar Rav Huna, nistak mamish. Cracked literally means cracked. So the Gemara says nifsal. What does it mean if it became this pasal? Pasal to malchus. That means that the monarchy took it out of circulation. But Rabbi Yehuda says no. Paslaso malchus nami hainu nistak. No. The truth is the monarchy taking out of circulation is the same thing as it cracked. Ella hechi dami nistak nifsal. Sorry. So what's the case of pasal? Shepaslaso medina zu v'yotze medina acheres. The case is where the currency cannot be used in this kingdom, but can be used in a different kingdom. Amr Rav Chisda So Rav Chisda said to Rav Huna, Lidi dach ta amrit nifsal paslaso malchus. So according to you, who says that when the Mishnah's case of pasal means that this monarchy said you can't use this coin, but it can be usable somewhere else, hare peros. What about the case where Reuven steals produce from Shimon, v'her kivu, and it rots, or yayin v'hichmitz, or he stole wine and it became vinegar. So the Gemara says, Dechi paslaso. Dechi pasalto malchus dami. So say in the Mishnah's case, remember again, the Mishnah compares the coin that became pasul to the produce that rotted or the wine that spoiled. Now we'll say, now what's the halacha? The katani mishalim kishasak zela. Now we'll say, now what's the halacha if you steal produce and it rots, or you steal wine and it turns to vinegar? So what's the halacha? You pay in accordance with the value of the object at the time that you stole it. And the Mishnah compares that case ultimately again to the case ultimately of a coin that became a pasul. Amar lehi, it's different. Hasam nishtana taimo v'rechol. We'll say in the case ultimately again of the produce that rotted or the wine that spoiled, both say the taste and the scent changed. Hacha lo nishtana. Over here by the currency, nothing inherently or physically changed about the currency itself. So according to you, it says that when the monarchy takes the coin out of circulation, that's the equivalent of when it cracked, of when the coin cracked. What about the case of where he's still truma and the truma became tamei? This is like a case of the monarchy taking the coin out of circulation. Vikatani, and what do we say? Omer Harush chalafanecha. We'll say, remember again, by the case of truma that became tamei, what do? Right? Reuven stole truma from Shimon, and now the truma becomes tamei. What's talacha? What does Reuven do? What does Reuven the thief do? He gives back the truma. He says, here, I stole truma, and I'm giving you back truma. So we'll say, so why don't we say the same thing by nistak? Amarle, hasam lo minkar hazeka, hacham minkar hazeka. We'll say, here's the difference. With truma that becomes tamei, that's hezek she'eno nikar. So we'll say, by hezek she'eno nikar, you could take the object and you could just return it back to the owner. We'll say, by a coin that's been taken out of circulation, that's nikar. Why is it nikar? Because we'll say, everyone knows the money that can be used and the money that can't be used. Not really similar cases. Itmar, hamal ve'eschavera alamat be'a v'nifsa hamabe'a. So we'll say this is an interesting case. So we'll say, let's say I go ahead and I lend Reuven produce. So now we'll say, we value the produce. You say, Reuven, let's say $1,000 of produce. You're going to pay me back $1,000, and we base that $1,000 on a particular type of currency. Right? You're going to give me back $1,000 of silver coins. And we identify the type of currency that is used for this repayment. Then what happens? We'll say, the nifsal hamatbeya. Then that particular coin was taken out of circulation. So what do we do now? So Rav says, we'll say Amabeis. Rav says, no selo matbeya yotze b'os hashal. Rav says, fine, no problem. What does Shimon do? Right? Shimon goes ahead and repays Reuven $1,000 based on the coinage that is usable at that time. That's the halacha at that time. Look at Rashi. No slomat beya yotze b'shas piron lo kibab alav lo se slomat beya v'haylav matbeyahu v'daf gilva pramatis. So we'll say. So therefore, in this case over here, Rav says very simple. All we do is we say, okay, Reuven, you lent Shimon $1,000 of produce. You based it on, now he has to pay you back $1,000 based on the silver coin A. Silver coin A is no longer in circulation. No problem. You pay him $1,000 based on the coin that is in circulation. Shmuel says, Yachar lomar lo, lech hotzia b'meishan. Wow. I will say, watch this. Shmuel says, no, Shimon is allowed to pay back Reuven using the coinage or using the monetary instrument that they agreed on. That monetary instrument is no longer usable here. So what could Shimon say to Reuven? Listen, as long as it's usable somewhere, this is what I'm giving you. This is what I'm paying you back. Go. Meishan is a place. In other words, go to Meishan. Go to a place where this currency is accepted and use it there. Incredible. Rav Nachman says, Mistabra milsei de Shmuel the isle archa lemeza lemeishon. Aval lesle archa lo. So let's listen to this. Rav Nachman qualifies Shmuel, and he says, when does Shmuel say that Shimon could pay back Reuven with the agreed upon currency, even though what? The agreed upon currency is not usable in their locale, right? He says, go to Meishan. That works as long as what? Reuven sometimes goes to Meishan. Okay. So if Reuven is a guy who sometimes journeys to Meshon, fine, then that is a legitimate statement. Since Reuven anyway is going to Meshon, and the agreed upon currency is usable in Meshon, so ultimately, again, Shimon could go ahead and pay him back in that money, even though what? That currency is not really usable here. Incredible. So Rabbi raised the question to Rav Nachman, in mechalin ala Moshe in Am Yisroel. So we'll say, now watch this. Here we go. Meiser Sheni. So we'll say, so now remember again, we know Meiser Sheni is produce that you have to go ahead and take to Yerushalayim, and ultimately, again, you have to consume Meiser Sheni Yerushalayim. Let's say, Baruch Hashem, Am Yisroel, all of us. I have too much produce. I can't transport everything. What could I do? I could transfer Meiser Sheni sanctity onto money, take the money to Yerushalayim, and spend the money in Yerushalayim. So watch this. So now the Gemara says like this. So we'll say, if you're going to transfer sanctity of Meiser Sheni onto money, you cannot transfer sanctity onto money that can't be used in Yerushalayim. Okay, the Gemara says, for example, Ketzad, Hayulo Mo'oz Kozivios, Yerushalmios, Osham Malachim Arishon. So we'll say, for example, if you have Mo'oz Kozivios, Rashi, what are Kozivios? This is so interesting. So the Gemara says, these are Matbea Shel Ben Koziva. We'll say, who is Ben Koziva? Ben Koziva was Bar Kochva. Bar Kochva, right? If you have Bar Kochva currency, which was once the currency used in Yerushalayim, it's beautiful. It's a historical gem. What's the problem with it? You mamish can't buy a falafel with it, right? In other words, not right. You can't do anything with it. So you can't go ahead and redeem Meiser Sheni on Mo'oz Kozivios Yerushalmios, Osham Lachmar Rishonim, or money of earlier monarchies. In Mechalolin, you can't use it. And I was saying, now what's the chap with those type of currencies? They're not good where? Anywhere. Right? That's antiquities, right? In other words, you can't use those. You can't, that money does not work. Now what can you infer from this? But I will say ultimately again, if you have money, shalachronim, in other words, contemporary currency, but it's somewhat comparable to earlier currency. We'll say, how do you have contemporary currency that's comparable to earlier currency? How do you have that? It's not usable here, but it's usable somewhere. So I will say, as opposed to Kozivios, Yerushalmios money, which is not usable anywhere. Can't use it anywhere, right? So the Maisa that you can't use. But you could infer from it, I will say, that for Meiser Sheni purposes, you can go ahead and redeem Meiser Sheni on money that is usable somewhere, even if it's not usable here. Take a look at Rashi. Hashalachronim, the nafki b'medina acheres, the dubya derishonim hu bekach tein yotzes kan bim komosha balabayis shenifsul l'kan. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, you can use money. You can use money that maybe is not readily usable here, but is usable somewhere. It's usable somewhere. So I will say, that seems to contradict Rav Nachman, right? Rav Nachman said, the only time you can utilize currency that is not usable in the locale of the person who's receiving it is where? Is where he normally travels to a locale where he can use it. But if he doesn't normally travel to a locale where he can use it, then ultimately, again, this currency is not good. Comes along Rava, and Rava says, you see, that's not true. Since at least for Meiser Sheni purposes, you could redeem Meiser Sheni on currency, even if that currency is not usable here, as long as what? It's usable somewhere. Someone like Hakam asking, what's the case over here? Kishein malchios makpidos zu al zu. So we're talking about a case where even currency that is not normally the currency of this monarchy, but the monarchies allow for a free exchange of currency. So you could use the currency of Kingdom A and Kingdom B and Kingdom B and Kingdom C. So there's a free flow of currency. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, really the money is usable everywhere. If that's the case, the Gemara says, Elaki Amar Shmuel. So I'll say, where's Shmuel's statement? That ultimately, Shmuel's statement that the purchaser could say to the seller, here I'm paying you back with the money, agreed upon money, go use it in Meshon. So the Gemara says, when does he say that? Ki Elaki Amar Shmuel, ki shemalchios makpidos zu al zu. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, Hechi matzi memati lahu. Ultimately, if the malchus of the kingdoms are makpid on each other, then how are you going to get money from one locale to the other? To be mak the idea d'chak dilo bakshi. So I will say, even though again the kingdoms are makpid, they're not that makpid. No one's searching you. No one's searching you, right? No one's doing it. So therefore, again, you can move money, so to speak, over the border, and no one's searching you. The imachshi kapti, the mishachi kapti. Therefore, we'll say halacha l'maisa. They're not going to search you, but if they search you and if they do find the currency, that's when they're machmir. Okay, so tashma. So we'll say another interesting case. So back to Meiser Sheni. So we'll say, so just to point out over here, what's fascinating about this entire discussion is the following. So remember, I will say, how did we get here? How did we get here? So how did we get here? So we got here that the Mishnah said the two cases of coinage, right? Two cases of coins. One case of coins was where Reuven steals a coin from Shimon and the coin cracks. In that case, ultimately, and the Mishnah said, no problem, you have to pay in accordance with the value of the coin at the time that you stole it. Case number 2 is ultimately, again, Reuven stole a coin from Shimon, and then the coin ultimately, again, was removed from circulation. In that case, that's hezek she'eino nicker, unrecognizable damage, and he could just say, Arish chalaf anecha. Here, it's yours. So now we saw machlokes as to whether or not the concept of a coin taken out of circulation is that hezek nicker, hezek she'eino nicker. So now what that kind of brought us up to is this case, ultimately machlokes Rabbi Shmuel, about this case where again Reuven sold produce to Shimon. Ultimately, again, the produce was valued at a particular amount, and with a particular coinage. Now it comes time to pay. That coinage is no longer acceptable. So now, Rav says Shimon has to pay Reuven in an acceptable coinage. Shmuel said no, he can pay him in the agreed upon coinage. What is he going to do with it? Go to Meishon and go ahead and spend the money there. So now the shaila becomes again this concept: if you have coinage, if you have currency that is not usable here but is usable somewhere, is that considered to be a valid form of repayment? And I both say it's not just about repayment. What else is it about? Is that considered to be ultimately, again, a valid form of deconsecration for or redemption for Maseches? Here we go. We'll say one more case. So the Gemara says, Tashma, in mechalin al ma'osh shal kan ve'im bava. So we'll say you can't redeem Meiser Sheni ultimately again on money that is here, on money, right? Al ma'osh shal kan ve'im bava. So look at Rashi just a moment. In mechalin al ma'osh shal kan ve'im bava. In mechalin Meiser Sheni al ma'osh shal kan Yerushalayim va'amos va'bailin bebava. So we'll say you can't redeem Meiser Sheni on money that is here ultimately again on the type of coinage, right? Ma'osh shal kan Yerushalayim money, and ultimately again, both the money and the owners are in Bavel. Or Vishal Bavel Vehin Kan. Or ultimately again, you can't use Bavel money and the object is here. Shal Bavel Vehin Bavel Mechalin. We'll say, what do you see from here? You can go ahead and use Bavel money. Everyone, you know what? Actually, we're going to stop over here. We don't have to rush with this. We're fine. We're moving at I'm a base tomorrow. Okay. All right, good. Good. We're moving at a good clip. We'll be fine. We'll pick up over here again tomorrow with this Meiser Sheni discussion and what type of money could be used in what scenario. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom. Great to see everyone. Have a great day.